I was looking over the notes for today's deep dive, and I realized I've been guilty of a pretty major oversimplification my whole life. I think most of us have.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
We tend to assume that if you want to take a piece of software global, you know, you build a great app in English and you want to launch it in Spain or Mexico,
Do you just swap the words?
you just swap the words, export a text file, hire a translator, and you're done.
That is the classic trap, the find and replace mentality. It assumes language is just a simple code, A equals B, and that's the end of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But looking at these source documents we have, specifically this massive effort to localize accounting software like osFinancials and TurboCASH, that approach isn't just lazy, it's actually dangerous.
It is. We're not talking about awkward phrasing or, a funny typo.
Not at all. We're talking about software that, if you translate it literally, could produce an illegal financial statement.
Right. Depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on.
Yeah.
Or even which side of the Andes Mountains.
It's incredible because this isn't a word processor, it's accounting. And accounting is really where language just crashes headfirst into the legal system.
It really is. I mean, the documents we're looking at, the localization reviews and correction logs, they paint a picture of a total minefield. A word that is professionally standard in Madrid can be confusing or even insulting in Mexico City.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and walk through that minefield. We'll explore how developers have to categorize entire nations into these specific groups and how they navigate the clash between different accounting standards, things like IFRS and PGC, and we'll explain what those are.
And how something as tiny as the label on a button can tell a user if the software is a professional tool or, just a toy.
It's a fascinating look at the sort of hidden work of software development.
Absolutely. The stuff nobody notices until it's wrong.
Okay, so let's start with the example that really set the tone in the source material. It's a phrase that has been in English accounting software for decades. Open set of books.
A classic. It's almost nostalgic, isn't it? It feels very 19th century.
Totally. A clerk with a visor opening a big ledger-bound ledger. So you're a translator, you see open set of books. The instinct is to go literal. Abrir libros contables.
Grammatically, it's perfect. Put it in an online translator, that's what you'll get.
Right.
But contextually, it's a disaster. And the source material points this out immediately. To a modern user, libros contables brings up a very specific image.
A dusty stack of physical books.
Exactly. But the user is sitting in front of a computer. They're not opening a book, they're accessing a database, they're loading a digital company file.
So it frames the whole experience incorrectly from the very first click.
It does. The feedback in these logs from the localization experts was blunt. They said, if you use Libros, the software feels archaic. So the correction was to translate the intent, not the words.
So what did they land on?
They standardized on empresa, which means company, or contabilidad, which means accounting.
Ah, so open company.
Exactly. It's clean, it's modern, and it tells the user exactly what's happening. We are opening the digital records for this business.
Accuracy over literalism. That seems to be the big theme. But let's get into the geography of this. The biggest surprise for me was that you can't just have a generic Spanish setting.
Yeah.
The sources divide the Spanish-speaking world into two very distinct camps, Group A and Group B.
This is what they call the Great Divide. And it's not just about accents or slang, it's about deep-seated commercial culture. The software has to literally swap out terminology based on these groups.
Let's break down Group A. Who's in that club?
Group A is basically Spain and the southern cone of South America. So you're looking at Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Paraguay.
Okay.
And then there's this one fascinating outlier that I think surprises everyone, Equatorial Guinea.
In Africa.
In Africa. It's the only sovereign African nation where Spanish is an official language. And because of its legal history, their accounting terminology aligns strictly with Spain. They look to Madrid for their standards.
Wow. Okay, so what's the key term for Group A?
It's the words for the people you do business with. Group A uses cliente for customer and proveedor for supplier.
That sounds pretty straightforward. I think I learned cliente in first-year Spanish.
You did, and for Group A, that works perfectly. But then you run into Group B.
And Group B is?
Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Venezuela, most of Central America. And if you use cliente in the back-end accounting modules there, it just feels wrong.
But why? I mean, a customer is a customer, right?
In a shop, yes. If you're buying a coffee, you're a cliente. But in a professional ledger, in an ERP system, these countries see the relationship as financial, not just transactional.
So they prefer a different term.
They prefer deudor, which means debtor, and acreedor, which means creditor.
Deudor. That sounds much more serious.
It's technical. It's formal. The notes warn that if you label your accounts receivable as clientes in Mexico, it feels like point-of-sale software for a small shop, not an enterprise system for a corporation. Deudor implies a legal obligation.
And the notes mention some messy overlaps. It's not a perfectly clean split.
No, Chile is the rebel. They're in Group A, so they use cliente. But when it comes to labeling a column for amount, Spain and Argentina say importe. Chile says, no, that's not right. And they side with Mexico, using monto.
So you can't just copy-paste the file from Argentina for Chile.
You can't. If you did, every single financial line would have this slightly foreign header. It's like using quid instead of dollars. You understand it, but it feels off.
Then there's El Salvador, which is even more specific.
Right. The notes say that for their reporting consistency, they use a credor for both creditor and supplier. They don't distinguish the terms in the same way. The software has to adapt to the local habit, not the other way around.
Wow. Speaking of friction, there's one word that seems to have caused more debate than anything else. A word that splits the world into three parts.
The stock wars.
Yes. This is a perfect example of UI design crashing right into linguistics.
It really is. In English, it's easy. Stock report, check the stock. 5 letters. Fits on any button. Simple.
In Spanish, it's a huge problem. You have 3 options, and picking any one of them makes you wrong in half the world.
So what's option 1?
Option 1 is the Spanglish approach. Just keep the word stock.
Is that actually acceptable in a professional context?
In Argentina and Uruguay, absolutely. It's completely normal. Business people say el stock, and developers love it because it's short, it's efficient.
But I'm guessing Spain has an opinion on this.
Spain has a law on this. Their legal accounting plan, the PGC, uses the term existencias. That is the formal legal word.
Existencias. That's a lot longer than stock.
11 letters.
Yeah.
So now you have a user interface problem. If you put existencias on a tiny little button, the text gets cut off.
So what's the solution?
A really clever compromise. The source material shows they use stock for the tight UI spaces, like buttons and tabs. But for the formal balance sheet headers, where legal compliance is critical, they switch to the proper existencias.
Okay, that handles Spain. What about Mexico and the Andean countries? They hate stock.
Right.
It just sounds lazy to them. But they don't really use existencias either. Their standard is inventario.
Inventario. 10 letters. Double the length of stock.
Exactly. So again, if your interface was designed for stock and you switch the language to Mexican Spanish, your button suddenly says inventar. And that's it. They actually had to redesign screen layouts just to accommodate the word inventario.
There was another note in that section about a drill-down plugin that felt like a logic puzzle. Something about factura de artículo de inventario versus artículo de inventario en factura.
It sounds like word salad, I know, but it's critical database logic. In English, we just say stock item invoice, but that's ambiguous. Does that mean a list of invoices that contains stock items, or a list of stock items found on one invoice?
I see. One is about the document, the other is about the line item inside it.
Precisely. In Spanish, you have to use those little prepositions to define the relationship. So the translators had to go back to the developers and ask, what does this button actually do? That precision prevents so much user frustration.
Okay, let's pivot from the words to the rules, because beneath all this vocabulary are the legal frameworks. And it turns out you can't just sort a financial statement however you want.
This is the why behind the words. This is the big clash between Spain's PGC, the Plan General de Contabilidad, and the International Financial Reporting Standards, or IFRS.
And IFRS is the global standard now, for the most part.
For the most part, yes. Almost all of Latin America, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Colombia, they've all moved to IFRS, or NIF, as it's called in Spanish.
But Spain holds on to its own system.
Spain holds on, and the biggest practical difference between them is something called sorting order.
How much does that really matter? Is it just cosmetic?
Oh, no, it flips the entire balance sheet completely upside down.
Oh,
Yeah. In Spain, under the PGC, the law requires sorting by maturity. You list your non-current assets first. The heavy stuff, factories, land, things you keep for a long time. Cash is last.
So it's a stability-first kind of view.
Exactly. But IFRS, which is what Mexico and the rest of Latin America use, sorts by liquidity.
Cash is king.
Cash is king. Current assets, your bank accounts, your inventory, they go right at the top. Fixed assets are at the bottom.
So if a developer just takes the Spain translation file, changes the currency to pesos, and ships it to Mexico.
They are shipping a non-compliant financial statement. The Group 1 accounts are where the Group 2 accounts should be. It's not a translation error anymore. It's a structural legal error. The math is right, but the report itself is wrong.
That explains why the notes section on country-specific nightmares was so intense. Mexico sounds like the final boss.
Mexico is notoriously difficult because of the SAT, their tax authority, they're incredibly digitized. They mandate a specific catálogo de cuentas, a chart of accounts. You can't just name your accounts whatever you want.
You have to map to the government's list.
You have to map your internal codes to their master list for electronic reporting. If the software doesn't support that mapping, you simply can't do business there.
And then there's Venezuela. The notes on that were honestly pretty heartbreaking.
It's a tragedy baked right into the code. Standard accounting software assumes money has a relatively stable value. In Venezuela, with hyperinflation, that's just not true. So the software has to handle inflation adjustments as a core feature, not an add-on.
And the dual currency rates. I saw notes on DIPRO and DICOM.
Right. There were often two different official exchange rates for the currency against the dollar at the exact same time, depending on what you were buying. Standard IFRS doesn't really have a box for that. The software logic has to be rewritten for that economic reality.
It really drives home that software has to reflect the real world, no matter how messy it gets. Let's lighten it up a bit and talk about the UI, the human language.
The toy versus tool problem.
Right. Notes have a section on press versus click. I admit, I use these interchangeably all the time.
We all do in conversation. But in technical writing, it matters. The source material is very strict about this. Pressione, or press, is reserved only for physical keys.
Like press escape.
Exactly. You don't press a button on a screen, you click it. So for any on-screen button, the translation has to be haga click. It sounds like a small thing, but if you get it wrong, it makes the software feel sloppy.
And they caught a dialect issue there, too, with presiana.
Yes, that's the informal Argentine U. It's friendly, but too casual for professional software. They had to hunt those down and standardize everything to the neutral pressione or haga click.
I also love the directory versus folder debate.
That's a great one. A carpeta, or folder, is a visual icon on your desktop. But the developers argue that directorio, or directory, implies a file path, a database location, a structure.
So if the software asks me to select the data folder and calls it a carpeta,
it sounds a bit like consumer software. But if it says select the data directory, or directorio, it sounds like a robust ERP system. It inspires confidence.
And then there's the next problem, siguiente versus proximo. I honestly thought they were synonyms.
In English, next covers everything. Next page, next week. But in Spanish, siguiente is for sequence. Page 1, page 2, the siguiente page. Próximo is for time, the próximo week.
So the software was saying, próximo número, next number.
Which implies a number that will arrive in the future, but it was just an invoice counter, n+1. They had to fix it to siguiente so the user understands it's just the next integer in a sequence.
That is such a fine detail. Okay, let's get into the financial statement showdown. This is where things get really heated between Spain and Latin America over profit and loss.
This is the terminology that determines if you feel like you're making money or just getting a perk.
So Spain uses the word beneficio.
Spain and Equatorial Guinea, yes. Beneficio means benefit or profit. But in Mexico and most of South America, beneficio sounds like employee benefits, healthcare, vacation time.
So if a CEO in Mexico looks at the bottom line and sees beneficio, they're not thinking about net profit.
They're confused. They're thinking, why is my benefits package on the P&L? The standard term in Latin America is utilidad.
Utilidad.
Which literally means utility or usefulness. It sounds a bit cold in English, but in Spanish accounting, utilidad is the hard number. It's the profit.
And the names of the reports themselves change, too.
They do. In Spain and the Southern Cone, you print a pérdidas y ganancias, a P&L. In Mexico and the Andes, that sounds old-fashioned, they want an estado de resultados, an income statement.
There's also a fight over the word report itself. I saw a note that Group A refuses to use the word reporte.
This is a purity test. In Spain and Argentina, reporte is seen as a bad Spanglish word, a corruption of the English report. The proper word is inform.
But Mexico is fine with reporte.
Mexico and Central America use reporte all the time in business. In fact, to them, an inform sounds like a long narrative essay, like a police report. A reporte is a data table, so the software has to dynamically rename the menu items.
I want to highlight one last technical acronym battle. DC versus DH.
This is the hallmark of expert localization. In English, ledger columns are debit and credit, DNC.
So a lazy translation would just be debito and credito, DNC.
which seems logical, right? But in Spanish accounting, débito and crédito are consumer banking terms. A debit card, store credit. The proper academic terms for the left and right columns are debe and Haber.
So the abbreviation has to be DH.
Correct. If I'm an accountant and I log into software and see headers labeled DC, I immediately know it was translated by someone who doesn't understand my profession. But if I see DH, I know the developers did their homework. It's a shibboleth. It proves you belong.
Let's wrap up with the nuts and bolts of grammar and formatting. Apparently, the developers were getting yelled at for their prepositions.
The I plus LL rule. It's basic grammar, but it's hard to code if you're just gluing strings together. In Spanish, you cannot say enviar el proveedor, send to the supplier. A and L have to contract al.
Enviar al proveedor.
Exactly. The source code had bugs where it was building sentences and creating these grammatically incorrect phrases. It just looks illiterate.
And what about the telegraphic style?
That's for saving space on the screen. In a column header, instead of the full código de artículo, code of the article, you just use código artículo. You drop the prepositions.
But you can't do that for error messages.
No, absolutely not. A column header is just data. An error message is a conversation. If you use that telegraphic style in an error, can't delete item, it feels robotic and rude. It has to be a full, polite sentence. No puede eliminar este artículo.
Finally, the alphabet soup of tax IDs. You can't just have a field called tax ID.
No, because nobody knows what their tax ID is. They know their government acronym. In Spain, you look for the NIF field. In Argentina, you need your CUI. In Chile, it's the RUT.
And if the software just says tax ID,
The user files a support ticket. Where do I put my RFC, which is the Mexican one? By just changing that one label based on the country, you eliminate thousands of support calls.
it's just overwhelming when you look at it all at once. We started this thinking translation was easy, but localization is really an exercise in cultural and legal empathy.
It is. It's about respect. It's deciding if your user is a cliente or a deudor, if they view their financials by liquidity or maturity, if they need to see Haber to feel like it's professional-grade software.
It's the difference between software that just works and software that actually fits.
Exactly. And I think the final takeaway here is about those invisible details. When a user in Buenos Aires opens the software and sees Empresa instead of set of books, they probably won't stop and think, wow, what a great translation.
No, they just get on with their work.
They just work because it feels native. It feels right. But if those details were wrong, if it said Libros or DC, they would feel this constant low-level friction. They would know it's foreign. True localization is when the user doesn't even notice it.
That is a great place to leave it. The best design is invisible. Thank you for walking us through the Davy and the Haber of it all.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, next time you switch a language setting on an app, just take a second to appreciate the thousands of decisions, the fights over stock versus inventario that happen behind the scenes to make that screen make sense to you. Until next time.